Indie rock pop punk legends Say Anything are back with their 8th and final album. After this, they are calling it quits. Max Bemis said a very long, lengthy post about why this is coming to an end and what's happening behind the scenes, what he's planning on doing, and things like that. But in the absence, they've left us with one final album called Oliver Appropriate, and it's kind of a definitely a sending off of sorts. He described it as a spiritual successor, or really a direct successor, the first time he's really done a direct successor to their magnum opus, which is Is a Real Boy. And it kind of, there's some elements there that work. However, it's not exactly what you would expect. And unfortunately, I have to make this disclaimer when you review any kind of Say Anything album. If you're looking for Is a Real Boy 2, you're not going to find it here. That said, there are a few songs on here that definitely kind of emulate that sound or that feeling that Is a Real Boy kind of gave you, particularly the 2 tracks that they released as singles, which are Pink Snot and Days, the first initial singles that kind of hit us. And those really do kind of feel at home, like they could be a successor to Is a Real Boy. They don't sound exactly like that. They're a little bit more grounded, I would say. They're not quite as fantastical, especially lyrically, as anything on Is a Real Boy. They're a little bit more on the nose in a sense of what they're talking about and the topic, and that's kind of where the problems start, and kind of something that's led to them not being able to kind of recapture that magic. And if you listen to Is a Real Boy, particularly when talking about it lyrically, a lot of it has to do with the metaphors and the descriptions and just these really over-the-top euphemisms that he uses throughout the album that he really kind of hasn't recaptured in any way. I mean, there's been flashes here and there, but not in the same scope as he has with Is a Real Boy. And really kind of, I would say that the follow-up albums, he kind of did a decent job with that in Defense of the Genre, as well as their self-titled album, which I'll get to in a little bit. But it's a little bit on the nose, particularly when we're talking about drug use, and that's a lot of the things that people kind of aimed for them to go back, and that was kind of one of the issues that you hear people criticize about the band, wishing that he would go back on drugs. And he kind of addressed that in the post that he made, which was that he never really was much of a druggie, really kind of put on that persona in the albums and then on stage and things like that. And he had his issues, and of course there were problems, but not to the extent as people really thought, and it wasn't as much of an influence in terms of the writing as people really kind of thought. At least that's what Max says, and I'm inclined to believe him over fans screaming about how they wish he would divorce or go back on drugs, and just so they can get music for whatever reason, or some kind of horrible comments that people have said throughout the years. And there's the reason I'm talking about that is because I feel like he's been chasing that because of those comments. I feel like he's kind of been chasing that same, for lack of a better word, high that Is a Real Boy kind of gave in general, and that it was a high point. It's not my favorite album, but I really think it's definitely one of their stronger albums, no matter how you look at it. There are a lot of people who are simply Is a Real Boy fans and not necessarily Say Anything fans. But back to the songs, both Days and Pink Snot are very kind of on the nose, talking about the drug use. Pink Snot talking about, with the whole chorus about I'm a pill man. And Days just kind of talking about what it's like being in a daze of just kind of a drug-filled haze. And I like them both. They're kind of these weird, it's one of the things he does very, very well is the juxtaposition of the kind of grimy lyrics of talking about these things over the kind of like really upbeat punk inspired kind of acoustic guitar driven tracks that they have. There's a little bit of style, a little bit of show-offness in Pink Snot that I like. I think that it kind of brings back a lot of memories of some of the moments of Is a Real Boy, and I think in that regard, those two songs are kind of the strongest ties to that album. But the rest of the album, I don't necessarily think really ties back to it, whether he was intentionally trying to, which it sounds like he was, or whatever happened. It's definitely not the sequel that people may have been thinking it was, and that's why I said I'll talk about the self-titled, because honestly I really think, and I might do another video on this at some point, I think the self-titled is the real follow-up to Is a Real Boy. I think that there's a lot of mirror tracks on that album that really kind of, it's basically Is a Real Boy a lot more polished. So if you're looking for that sequel, I think you will really, I think people should give that album another chance. That's another time, another place. The song Eau Jersey is probably one of my favorite tracks off of this album. I've got a few on here that really, it does kind of feel like something that would be on Is a Real Boy, but again, I feel like lyrically speaking, it's a little bit too on the nose. It's about a kind of told from his perspective of reuniting the band and coming back and hoping that people should recognize him, and kind of using his status to get girls and things like that. It's an interesting song. It's another one that's got that upbeat kind of clapping background music and instrumentals, with his lyrics kind of talking about being kind of a scummy guy in a band. It's definitely probably one of the better tracks on here, and one that I really enjoyed. If you read the big send-off that Max wrote, a big huge post, one of the things he kind of talks about is coming to grips with his sexuality and not necessarily being completely straight. And there's a few songs that definitely deal with that on here. In particular, Mouth Breather, I would say It's a Process, Send You Off, as well as Your Father, all kind of deal with that issue. Send You Off kind of talks about kind of being conflicted, and mentions being raised in like a semi-rich home, and kind of feeling like that might have something to do with those feelings, and not being sure. And there's a few things going on there. I think it comes from an honest point, and there's a lot of really that if you listen to a lot of Say Anything, there is definitely that under the surface. He's written a lot of songs from the perspective of a female character, not necessarily himself, but it kind of feels like it's coming naturally, and it's not necessarily something he's unfamiliar with, those feelings that he's talking about. And here it is as well. Mouth Breather is kind of a light song, I would say, about kind of having a crush on someone you don't think you're supposed to. It's definitely if you're not a fan of the duets between him and Sherry, she's kind of the background backing vocals on that track. It's one of those songs, so you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. Your Father is a great song, with the vocals of actually who did the drumming on this album, which is Carl Cohen of Museum Mouth, that you've heard me talk about, probably one of my more favorite bands. The song It's a Process, which also kind of talks about some of those things, is something that feels really like it would be straight off of In Defense of the Genre. In particular, it kind of mirrors Baby Girl I'm a Blur with the electronic sample drum work on there. But it's a fun song. I like it. It definitely it's one of the better tracks on here. Send You Off is also one of my favorite tracks on here. Just especially the chorus line. I think it really kind of works and connects, like some of the songs really don't. There's a acoustic track on here called Got Fired, Just Fired, and it's a little weird. I don't necessarily like it. It feels a little bit out of place throughout the album in general, overall, but the whole theme of that, dealing with their sexuality and stuff, I mean, is kind of something that I think some people are kind of going to glaze over. It's not going to really even notice them. Some people may have a problem with them. I know how some of the fans are out there, but I think it's important that he kind of finally has dealt with some of that, because it seems like, especially from the post he wrote, that he's kind of been holding this in and dealing with it for a very long time. So I think to kind of come to grips in it and kind of express it in the music is a very important thing to do for him, and I'm sure it was definitely something cathartic. the album ends with a track called Sentiment, and it kind of follows the pattern of a lot of the songs on this album, which is that they kind of start off simple, soft, and eventually build up into something, and then just kind of fall apart at the end. Not necessarily fall apart in terms of quality, but just all the instrumental, everything kind of feels like it just scatters and it kind of just ends. This one kind of fades off a little bit. You hear him talking. There's some static going on. It's an interesting send off. As far as an ending track goes, I think it kind of sets the mood and kind of ends the mood of this whole album. Overall, and this the whole point of the album was supposed to kind of, as I said, it's supposed to be a continuation of Is a Real Boy and kind of continue the character from Is a Real Boy, now given a name, Oliver Appropriate, and it's kind of meant to carry on that from that album and continue those adventures. And lyrically speaking, there's some moments. Musically, instrumentally speaking, there's some moments, but it never really quite recaptures that. So that said, when talking about this album, I don't think it's fair to kind of look at it in that light. I don't think it's fair, even though he has said that it's a sequel. I mean, I'm glad this isn't titled Is a Real Boy 2 or something like that, or some play on that title, because I think that would have been really, really setting up expectations too high and for something that this album is not, and taken outside of that context and outside of Is a Real Boy, it's an excellent album. I think it's a solid addition to the discography. I don't think it's the best that they've done. I think that they really did kind of hit a high point with 2017's I Don't Think It Is. I really think that was a lot of ways that is in itself its spiritual successor to Is a Real Boy, in the sense that it was this kind of gritty and raw and underproduced album. And I think that kind of recaptures some of that magic. I think that this feels like it's kind of forcing itself into a box a little bit at the worst, at the moments. But when it's at its best, it really is everything you like about Say Anything. The catchy drums, like the kind of erratic guitars, the emotional lyrics, the kind of those euphemisms, those metaphors that he throws in there, and kind of this the over-the-top kind of griminess of it, all kind of juxtaposed against the almost pop-punk feeling of the instrumentals. So I think that in a lot of ways, it's definitely a good Say Anything album. Again, I would say it's probably not their best that they've done. Even coming from somebody who doesn't think Is a Real Boy is their best, I think that it fits in nicely. I think, again, it's kind of going to be polarizing. If you've stuck with them, it feels like a lot of it feels more like a modern Say Anything album post their self-titled album. But I think there's a lot to like there. I think that it is a good send-off. I mean, everybody worked very hard on this album, and I think it really shows. I think everything kind of, at the very least, everything connects on this album. And a lot of times it is emotional. There's a lot of things lyrically for people to connect to, especially people, again, who probably are experiencing some confusion or uncertainty with their sexuality or their gender identity and things like that. And it's something that kind of it does deal with on here. So I think that in that sense, it is a good thing for people to connect to with that. And I just overall, I enjoyed it. I think it's worth a listen if you're a Say Anything fan. If you're just, again, set your expectations at the door. It is not Is a Real Boy 2. It's not, I wouldn't even call it a spiritual successor. It is a Real Boy. I don't think it quite hit that mark. And again, I'm glad it's a different title entirely, so that way at least, that expectation isn't exactly ingrained when you go to pick up this album and listen to. I'm sad to see the band go. I mean, they are one of my favorite bands. I'm hoping someday that he'll come back and kind of reunite and whether we get a tour or what, or as a reunion or a new album, I really kind of hope, because I feel like, despite, I just think a lot of the pressure has been because of the music, and specifically because of Say Anything. And, obviously Max Bemis has tried other projects and has other things like Two Tongues or Perma, and I've liked all of them so far, so I kind of feel like he definitely has a ton in him, and I would like to see the project of Say Anything come back as well, obviously. But as far as a send-off goes, I mean, I think Oliver Appropriate is a decent send-off. I'm not, this isn't going to make me mad that this is the last Say Anything album that we might get. And I really think that he's kind of poured his heart into us, and at the very least, you kind of get that sense of honesty and that real earnest workmanship that goes into an album like this. So I would say give it a listen. It's worth it. It's enjoyable. You're going to find tracks that you probably really like. You're probably going to find certain tracks that, you're going to forget or probably not listen to as much. But definitely make sure you check it out. Thank you so much for watching the review of Say Anything's Oliver Appropriate, their final album as of now. And, let me know what you think of this album, or if at this point, if you've only heard the singles, just let me know what your kind of thought process is on this down in the comments below. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel for more videos. Make sure you're following me on social media, on Twitter at Metalloud, as well as on Facebook. There's a Facebook page, facebook.com/Metalloud, as well as the website media-dissection.com/Metalloud. On Instagram, metal_loud, and make sure you look to donate to the Patreon if you would like. It's patreon.com/Metalloud.